On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon disaster changed the lives of millions living near the Gulf of Mexico, as well as the scientists who responded to the crisis. These are some of their stories, intimate portraits of research, innovation, discovery. Welcome, I'm Jim McNamee, editor of Dispatches from the Gulf, a series of documentaries, short videos, and podcasts. In today's podcast, Dr. Kait Frasier of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography explains her work in bioacoustics, how she uses advanced underwater recording techniques to learn about whales and dolphins in the Gulf of Mexico.
I do dolphin bioacoustics, so basically figuring out what we can learn about dolphins from the sounds that they make in the wild. We can record sound really well over long periods of time, and we know we can recognize certain types of calls within that sound, and so we push every time the work that we do a little bit further and get a little bit more detail and a little more complexity out of what we're doing. My work has been very focused on recordings that we've collected in the Gulf of Mexico since the oil spill. So now we have about almost 6 years of data, and I'm still trying to process all of that and figure out what happened in the 6 years after the spill. There are 13 species of offshore dolphin in the Gulf of Mexico, and we know very little about them. So our work is aimed at trying to get a more detailed, year-round sense of how dolphins and other marine mammals are using the Gulf of Mexico, which is a really special habitat, but also a very highly impacted area. And the amazing thing about acoustics is that you can put this instrument out there and it sits on the seafloor, it records 24/7, it doesn't care what the weather's like, it doesn't care if it's night or day. So we get a really strong data set out of that.
Kait is about to walk us through the process of making a super durable, high-fidelity version of the audio recorder I'm using right now. Then she'll describe what she hopes to learn from the whale calls she captures, and why it's so complicated trying to understand how whales are doing in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
What we do in this lab is build basically the Cadillac of deep sea recording devices. This is an underwater computer, a high-performance underwater computer that has basically cards like you would have in your laptop and a bunch of disk drives. That each one of these would be one laptop hard drive, but we've stacked them in series, so there are 16 of them, so that we can record data for a whole year at really high sample rates underwater. So what happens is we put this computer into a box, basically, that we throw into the water, and it's attached to something like a underwater microphone or a hydrophone. So in here, there's a little device that receives sound. So sound hits this sensor, travels through this cable to the computer, and is turned into a digital signal that is recorded on these hard drives. And that happens constantly for a year. And then we can go back to the location where we deployed the instrument, send out a little ping signal, it goes doot, 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 and that makes the instrument drop its ballast weight, and it floats up to the surface. And then we can pick up the instrument and bring it home with all of the data inside. It's kind of an unbelievable moment because you know this thing sat there waiting for you for a year. It's amazing every time that it works. So that's basically our research program in a nutshell. So once we get the data back, we're talking about maybe 8 terabytes worth of data. So that's a huge amount of data to sift through. And one way that we analyze that data is we turn it into visual summaries of the data that we can scroll through by eye and actually look at the sound instead of listening to it, because that would take a whole nother year to listen to all the data. So we look at the data, we look at sound. And then based on the question that we're trying to answer or the research we're trying to do, we'll zero in on specific sounds that are interesting and relevant to our research question and analyze those more closely. So these instruments sample 200,000 times a second, and that gives you a signal in which you can find everything from low frequency baleen whale calls that are so low that you can feel them, but you can't hear them, all the way up to ultrasonic dolphin signals that are outside of our high frequency hearing range. These instruments capture all of that. Here's an example of a 4-hour period while this instrument was recording. And this is during the time when a lot of boats were going in and out trying to service the spilling well. And you can see all these different splotches or boats that went by. And in the middle of all of that are sperm whale clicks, these echolocation clicks that sperm whales are making. And we can zoom in and get a close-up picture of these echolocation signals that the animals are using to find food and explore their environment. And we can use these signals to understand what species were present and what they're doing in the habitat. There are two phases that we might expect to see of response to the oil spill, and this was seen in the Exxon Valdez spill. So there's an initial period where you might expect animals to die because of the direct oil impacts. And then over a longer period of time, you might expect chronic impacts to cause gradual population declines. So we're looking for both of those signals, but you need a very long time series to see that with marine mammals because they're top predators, and it takes a long time for impacts to work their way up the food chain from what's living in the sediment to a whale.
Today, thousands of scientists, oceanographers, chemists, engineers, biologists are all working together to develop newer and better ways to understand and ease the impact of oil spills. To learn more about their work, visit our webpage at dispatchesfromthegulf.com. Funding for this podcast was provided by a grant by the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. And thanks for listening.